Hello, and welcome to Top Story Daily Edition. I'm JNS Editor-in-Chief, Jonathan Tobin. Thanks for joining me for another discussion on the most pressing issues in the Jewish world. Please like, subscribe, and give us good reviews when you listen to the show. Now let's get started. 7 months of an unprecedented surge in antisemitism that has turned American college campuses and even K-12 schools into hostile environments for Jews has changed a lot of minds about the issue. The willingness of much of the political left to downplay or even justify the atrocities of October 7th, and then to flip the narrative about the war that Hamas started to one in which the victims of terrorism are somehow the real villains of the story, has shocked even many political liberals into rethinking their assumptions about where the real danger to Jews lies. But not the New York Times. As 2 lengthy news features published in the paper this week confirmed, the flagship of liberal journalism in the United States hasn't let events or the reality of a post-October 7th world interfere with their ideological or political agendas. In one story, the newspaper devoted the time of 4 reporters to take a deep dive into contemporary anti-Semitism. But the result of what is described as their extensive research is that they have come to the conclusion that the real culprits are not the people who seek the destruction of the one Jewish state on the planet, legitimize a genocidal terrorist movement as justified resistance, or attempt to allow those responsible for the mass murder of 1,200 Jews to get away with it. Instead, the Times believes that the problem rests with, surprise, Republicans, who are rallying in support of a beleaguered state of Israel and who are opposed to the deluge of Jew hatred on display in the American public square since the current war began. In another story, the paper reported a congressional hearing about the growing problem of anti-Semitism in K-12 schools throughout the country is primarily one about those institutions, how those in charge scored points against members of Congress who care about the issue. These are just 2 prominent examples out of many that could be pointed to that show how the Times and other liberal media outlets manipulate coverage of this issue to promote their own partisan agendas. They are worth noting precisely because they illustrate how ideological agendas work to present a distorted picture of a crisis that serves primarily to deflect attention from the real cause of the problem. In this case, that means denying or downplaying the fact that the principal engines of anti-Semitism in 2024 America are left-wing ideologies like critical race theory and intersectionality, which grant a permission slip to Jew hatred. The pervasive influence of these toxic ideas in American education has helped to indoctrinate largely ignorant students to parrot what earlier generations might have easily understood to be Soviet-era Marxist propaganda about Zionism being racism and Israel being an apartheid state, against which all resistance, even the orgy of rape, torture, kidnapping, and wanton destruction that the Palestinians carried out on October 7th, can be justified. These ideologies have mainstreamed a belief that the world is divided into 2 perpetually warring groups, white oppressors and people of color who are their victims. And it is only through belief in the orthodoxies of this new secular religion can one conclude that Israel, the democratic nation that was attacked, is a genocidal white oppressor, even though the majority of Israeli Jews are people of color since they trace their origins to the Middle East or North Africa, and that the real genocidal terrorists of Hamas and their Palestinian supporters are victims deserving of sympathy and support. Moreover, only by subscribing to these ideas can the denomination of normative Jewish belief and the harassment of Jewish students up to and including in violence be treated as reasonable expressions of free speech. Everyone knows that if this sort of treatment were directed at other minorities, such as African Americans, Hispanics, or Asians, rather than being defended, it would be treated as racism and punished accordingly. But for the Times and its dogged reporters, the pro-Hamas disruptions of campus life are like the Black Lives Matter riots of the summer of 2020 that the paper also justified, mostly peaceful. Open calls for the destruction of the Jewish state, the from the river to the sea mantra, something that could only be achieved by genocide, and globalize the Intifada, supporting international terror against Jews, are parsed as mere expressions of sympathy for Palestinians. For the Times, the entire discussion about the woke delegitimization of Israel and Jewish rights is a distraction from what they are really interested in, the claim that Republicans and conservatives are the real anti-Semites. With masses of students, professors, and professional agitators rallying in support of Hamas in the wake of the brutal killing of 1,200 men, women, and children on October 7th, and venting their hatred against any Jews in reach, one need not dig deep to find evidence of open anti-Semitism in contemporary America. But the Times' outrage is still directed at their traditional targets, the same Republican Party that has become virtual lockstep supporters of Israel and opponents of anti-Semitism. Though the Gray Lady has a long history of discomfort with Zionism and downplaying anti-Semitism that stretches back to its non-coverage of the Holocaust, it has played a particularly important role in seeking to legitimize the movement to destroy Israel in recent years. This is seen not just on its editorial pages, where anti-Zionist and anti-Semitic opinion pieces, even those that call for Israel's destruction, have become commonplace. It has also been seen in their open advocacy in their news section for woke ideology and the intersectional framework associated with critical race theory. A straight line can be drawn from the paper's publication of its fraudulent 1619 project in 2019, which put forward a narrative about America being an irredeemably racist nation, and its coverage of the current surge in anti-Semitism. Partisanship also plays a huge role in shaping the coverage of anti-Semitism. The paper's story titled "How Republicans Echo Anti-Semitic Tropes Despite Declaring Support for Israel" is a classic example of this kind of misdirection play. Of course, there is evidence of anti-Semitism on the right. The embrace by right-wing talkers with large audiences like Candace Owens of anti-Semitic tropes, and the decision of former Fox News host Tucker Carlson to platform Israel haters on his show that can be seen now on X is deeply troubling. But the Times story doesn't even mention them. That's not surprising, because to do so would be to understand that in contemporary political discourse, most anti-Semitic rhetoric is couched in attacks on Israel and its supporters, something that undermines the left far more than the overwhelmingly pro-Israel right. Instead, they return to familiar refrains of Democrats in recent years. They resurrect the false claim that former President Donald Trump characterized those who attended the August 2017 Unite the Right neo-Nazi rally in Charlottesville, Virginia, as very fine people, when in fact he did no such thing. Yet they ignore the way that President Joe Biden treats those who oppose Palestinian claims of victimhood as morally equivalent to anti-Semites. And they minimize the constant drumbeat of anti-Semitic incitement from members of the left-wing congressional squad, such as Representatives Ilhan Omar and Rashida Tlaib. The article also claims that Trump's complaints about Jews who don't support him not caring about Israel are evidence of anti-Semitism. It may be both foolish and evidence of ignorance about the way most liberal Jews don't prioritize support for the Jewish state when they vote, but it isn't anti-Semitic. Their main interest, however, is in recycling the Democratic talking point that any criticism of George Soros, the Hungarian-born billionaire, who is the largest single donor to Democratic candidates and leftist causes through his Open Society Foundation, is anti-Semitic. They also assail anyone who speaks of globalists as engaging in anti-Semitic tropes that mainstream anti-Jewish rhetoric. The claim about Soros is simply a partisan talking point. Soros is Jewish, but has always eschewed any expression of Jewish identity or support for Jewish causes or Israel. If conservatives focus on his influence, it's because it is so pervasive, since his foundation has given away more money than any other such group in the world. By itself, his campaign to elect soft on crime prosecutors in cities throughout the United States has done as much damage to this country as that of any contemporary individual. And though the Times seeks to downplay it, his foundation has also been a major source of funding for groups that are helping to organize the pro-Hamas and anti-Semitic protests, as well as those in Israel that work to support terrorists and their apologists. At this point, criticizing Soros is not only not anti-Semitic, it is likely to be a sign of opposition to anti-Semitism. As for the use of terms like globalists, it does bear a resemblance to Stalinist anti-Semitic tropes about cosmopolitans who are fated to be liquidated in purges. But in the third decade of the 21st century, it is a reference to the debate about economic and political efforts to globalize the economy, much to the detriment of the working class, as well as to Green New Deal programs that would destroy the American economy and undermine individual rights. Such globalists are left-wing elites and corporate giants entirely unrelated to Jewish interests. To claim that it is an anti-Semitic trope that does nothing about actual anti-Semitism, but does serve to silence legitimate concerns and dissent against fashionable ideas the Times and left-wing Democrats champion. The paper does note the absurd claims about the Anti-Semitism Awareness Act put forward by Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene about its criminalizing belief in the New Testament. While those 20 Republicans who agreed with her deserve criticism, the paper characterized the 70 Democrats who think that Title VI protections of the 1964 Civil Rights Act shouldn't apply to Jews as commendable supporters of the First Amendment rights of anti-Semites. As far as the authors of the piece go, the significance of October 7th lies primarily in giving it an opening to Republicans. The article thinks that there is something unholy about the way the GOP has paraded its support for Israel and sought to contrast it with the behavior of the left-wing base of the Democrats, who have turned out in the streets on behalf of the Hamas murderers. The notion of October 7th being a pretext for Republican political maneuvers was also the basis of another article published that same day in the Times titled "How Public School Leaders Upstaged Republicans and the Ivy League." Mixing it up a bit, school leaders showed, and it was entitled "How Public School Leaders Upstage Republicans and the Ivy League." Mixing it up a bit, school leaders showed can go far towards neutralizing a Congress with a craving to make a point. The conceit of this piece was that the congressional testimonies of leaders of school districts in New York and Berkeley, California, where documented instances of woke indoctrination in K-12 schools are abundant, triumphed over the efforts of supposedly old-fish Republicans to portray them as anti-Semites. The hearing wasn't as successful as the one held by the same committee in December, during which 3 elite university presidents claimed it depended on the context as to whether calls for Jewish genocide violated their school's rules. It's true that most of the questioning this time wasn't as sharp or informed as it was at the previous hearing. But the problem about which organizations like the Jewish Public Interest law firm, the Deborah Project, have done extensive work about is real. The Times' main preoccupation now, as in December, is to castigate those GOP members, like Representative Elise Stefanik, who are focused on exposing the links between woke ideology and the surge in anti-Semitism as political opportunists and denying the reality of the Jew hatred they are trying to expose. Both articles say little about the real challenges of confronting contemporary anti-Semitism and a lot about the lengths to which ideologues will go to deflect attention from left-wing vitriol. Honest liberals and conservatives need to be able to confront the hate that comes from their own side of the political aisle, something that few of us in a politically bifurcated, hyper-partisan society seem capable of doing these days. In the meantime, the disgraceful efforts of the publication that once claimed to be the country's newspaper of record to downplay evidence of anti-Semitism that is real in favor of partisan talking points about their foes illustrates the equally dismal state of contemporary journalism. Thanks for listening. Please remember to tune in to the edition and every week for the full hour-long JNS TV program. Whether you're listening to us on Apple, Google Play, Spotify, or any of the other podcast platforms, or on the JNS YouTube channel, please like and or subscribe to Top Story, click on the bell for notifications, and give us good reviews. Please write to us at editor@jns.org and let us know where you listen or watch the show and what you think about it. And remember, keep reading and thinking for yourself.